Welcome to a realm where logic spirals into enigmatic puzzles, where the answers are as elusive as the questions themselves. No, it's not an episode of The Twilight Zone. Today we're venturing into the world of paradoxes. At the forefront is the notorious liar paradox, a puzzle that will twist your perceptions of truth and deception, but that is just the beginning. Stay with us today, because later in the video we're going to look at the Bootstrap Paradox, which is utterly mind-bending. Let's get into it. The liar paradox dates back thousands of years to the ancient Greeks, if not earlier. There are many variations of this paradox, but the most simple version is a single sentence. This statement is false. If the statement itself is false, then it would mean that it is actually true. And if the statement is true, it would mean that it is actually false. This means that whether you believe the statement to be true or false, it would be both true and false at the same time, which should be a logical impossibility. Early attempts to reconcile this paradox suggested that the statement simply was neither true nor false, which resulted in the strengthened liar's paradox. For example, the paradox could be rewritten as either this statement is not true, or this statement is only false. The first variation was designed to preclude the possibility that the statement was neither true nor false, and the second was designed such that it couldn't be both true and false. The paradox gets its name from the earliest accounts of the paradox, such as from Greek philosopher Eubulides of Miletus, who posed the paradox in the 4th century BC as, quote, "A man says that he is lying. Is what he says true or false?" While it may seem like a somewhat nonsensical paradox focused on semantics, language was built on classical binary truth value. Every statement must be either true or false. There have been numerous attempts to resolve the paradox, but unless someone is willing to just dismiss it as pointless nonsense, no such resolution can yet be found. This particular paradox is also proven to not just be completely pointless, having played a large role in mathematics. Self-referential paradoxes are easy to create in semantic language, but it was believed that such things didn't exist in maths. I have a question for all of you men out there. Does anyone like having things like acne, blackheads, dead skin on your face? No! Of course you don't. Everyone likes having clean skin. Everyone wants to be their best self. And if you don't, well, today's sponsor, T. Shanley, isn't for you, but for everyone else in the world, which is like 99.999% of you, T. Shanley is for you. Their goal is to help keep your skin fresh and clean, creating a routine for you to follow in order to deal with any unwanted skin blemishes. And on top of that, it's unbelievably easy to start and keep up with only a few clear steps to keep your skin clear and healthy. Honestly, it is the best skincare system for guys like you and me, plus it is super affordable, it doesn't break the bank, and it has over 7,000 5-star reviews on their website from satisfied customers all around the world. From face washes to moisturizers to exfoliating scrubs, they come with basic ingredients and steps that anyone can follow, and on top of that, every box comes with an instruction card that tells you when to use each product, how much to use, and in what order. They really make the process of achieving and maintaining amazing skin easy. And because T. Shanley is sponsoring today's video, they're offering you guys a great deal. Just click the first link in the description and you'll get 30% off your first box, plus a free gift. Don't miss out on this amazing deal. Click that link and get started. Thank you, T. Shanley, for sponsoring today's video. And now back to it. In 1901, mathematician Bertrand Russell discovered the set theory paradox, that the set of all sets that are not members of themselves cannot exist. Now, if you're unfamiliar with set theory, it's not actually terribly important. What matters is that it was a mathematical rephrasing of the liar paradox, as the set of sets that did not include themselves would have to simultaneously include and not include itself, which is impossible. This was extended by Kurt Gödel in 1930 to create his incompleteness theorems. By showing that a self-referential liar paradox could be written as a formal arithmetic statement, Gödel proved that no system of mathematics could ever be complete. While it's unusual for a paradox to have practical applications, Gödel's incompleteness theorems and his proof that no consistent formal system of maths can prove its own consistency is regarded as one of the greatest intellectual achievements of modern times. The Bootstrap Paradox gets its name from the phrase pulling oneself up by the bootstraps. While the meaning of that phrase has changed over time, the saying was originally intended to refer to something that was ludicrously impossible. After all, when confronted with a massive wall or fence, a person could not simply grab their bootstraps and pull on them to lift themselves over the barrier. There are many forms of this paradox, so we'll look at one of the more popular versions. Let's imagine a person who was both a huge fan of Albert Einstein and who also has access to a time machine. This person takes a copy of Einstein's theory of relativity, then travels backward in time to meet Einstein before he had begun work on his theory. The time traveler uses his book to teach Einstein about relativity before returning to his own time. Einstein then goes on to publish the work as his own, never making any reference to the time traveler. His work gets published repeatedly over the coming decades or even centuries until a copy of it finally winds up in the hands of our time traveler. So where did the theory of relativity actually come from? Einstein learned it from the time traveler, but the time traveler learned it from Einstein. The theory appears to have no point of origin. It pulled itself up by its bootstraps and created itself out of nothing. Well, therein lies the paradox. There are countless examples of these self-referential closed loops in media, such as in 12 Monkeys, the Terminator series, Back to the Future, Doctor Who, Game of Thrones, even Fraggle Rock. While the notion of an object or idea being trapped in a recursive time loop like this seems paradoxical to us, many scientists argue that it isn't actually a problem at all. In Futurama, for example, Fry went back in time and slept with his grandmother, thus becoming his own grandfather. However, he was always his own grandfather. Nothing in the causal chain of events was broken or changed, and the only paradox comes from how the original Fry could have come into existence in the first place. But because each iteration of the time loop is identical, it can be argued that such a time loop is self-sufficient and consistent with the laws of physics. Now, this becomes a little less clear when an object is part of the time loop rather than an idea or action. In the 1980 film Somewhere in Time, for example, an old woman gives Christopher Reeve a pocket watch. He later travels back in time and gives the pocket watch to Jane Seymour, playing the same character as the old woman before inadvertently returning to the present. The difference in this scenario is that the watch should be continually aging as it travels through each iteration of the loop. There are proposals for how this might still be possible, though they tend to involve a lot of complicated thermodynamics. For the purposes of storytelling, most writers choose to have the object be something like a letter that gets worn over time and is rewritten on fresh paper before being taken back in time, thus eliminating these concerns. While these time loops are paradoxical because they have an idea or object that seems to have created itself, many scientists and philosophers alike agree that the Bootstrap Paradox doesn't create a logical impossibility despite being really, really weird. But some time travel paradoxes present much bigger problems. The Bootstrap Paradox preserves the chain of causality, but in the Grandfather Paradox, we throw that entirely out the window. This paradox gets its name from the most common example of breaking causality, which is going back in time and killing your own grandfather before your parent is born. If you kill your grandfather, then you will never be born, but if you were never born, then your grandfather won't be killed and thus you will be born. Not only is this logically inconsistent, but it is also an example of reverse causation, which should not be possible. Normally, a cause results in an effect, but in the paradox, the cause results in the effect negating the cause. And if you happen to like your grandfather, there's the famous variant in which you go back in time to kill baby Hitler instead. This creates a similar problem, because if Hitler was dead at the time, then he wouldn't have done all that stuff that made you want to go back in time and kill him in the first place, nor would you have any knowledge of it. As such, you wouldn't go back in time to kill him, and he would rise to power, and so on. Should something like the Grandfather Paradox come to pass, we have no idea what would happen. The Bootstrap Paradox is weird, but it is still consistent. The Grandfather Paradox creates an inconsistency, and there is absolutely no consensus on how such an event could be handled. But there are a lot of theories. One popular theory is the idea of infinite parallel universes. If you go back in time, some would argue that you're not going back to your own timeline, rather you're going back to that point in a different universe. As such, the actions you take there would not break the chain of causality that had previously existed in your universe. Another theory is that the universe simply will not allow actions to take place in the past that would change the future. If you tried to change the past, the universe will employ comic book logic to prevent you from actually doing so. For example, if you go to the past to try and shoot your grandfather, the gun will jam, or if it didn't jam and you shot him, then you never saw the body. Or if you did see the body, then it wasn't really him, it was a robot or a clone or something like that, comic book logic. Or if somehow you actually succeeded in killing your grandfather, then it would turn out that he was never really your grandfather in the first place. Your parent was born because your grandmother had an affair, or you were actually adopted and your entire family kept it a secret your whole life. No matter how ridiculous the end scenario, the theory speculates that the universe would ensure that no actions you took in the past could result in reverse causation. So, well, why is this paradox important? Why are honest-to-God scientists spending so much real time and effort debating what, on the surface, seems like a ridiculous paradox? And the answer to that is that general relativity is pretty great. While it may be incomplete, general relativity has shown to be incredibly consistent at making accurate predictions about the universe around us. And according to general relativity, reverse time travel should theoretically be possible. Not only that, but in 1949, Gödel produced his solution to the Einstein field equations. His solution for the equations resulted in a model of spacetime that would inevitably create closed time-like curves. His wasn't the only solution to the field equations, but the notion that physics allows for reverse time travel is pretty consistent. As a result, any time travel paradox is of particular concern to physicists, no matter how ludicrous it may sound, as it could have very real implications on the universe around us. The Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea is famous for his 9 paradoxes. The most famous of these are the dichotomy argument, the arrow in flight, and Achilles and the tortoise. But since they're all very similar and all relate to motion, we'll stick with just the dichotomy argument. The argument states that which is in locomotion must arrive at the halfway stage before it arrives at its goal. That certainly makes sense and seems to be obviously true, but let's take this argument a little further, like Zeno did. Let's say you want to run a mile. Before you finish the mile, you must run half a mile. But before you can finish the second half mile, you must run a quarter of a mile, then an eighth, then a 16th, and so on. The remaining distance can be divided in half an infinite number of times, so the runner must complete an infinite number of tasks before arriving at the destination. According to Zeno, this means that it would be impossible to arrive at a destination because doing so requires a person to complete an infinite number of tasks in a finite amount of time, which can't be done. Similarly, this argument could apply to the start of the journey as well. Instead of dividing the second mile, we can divide the first. Before reaching the half-mile point, the runner must reach the quarter mile, the eighth of a mile, and so on. Extending the infinite divisions this way, it would be impossible for the runner to ever start or stop running. Zeno argued then that all motion must be an illusion. In his writings, the Greek philosopher Simplicius wrote that upon hearing Zeno's argument, the aptly named Diogenes the Cynic stood up and walked around, disproving the idea that motion was impossible. Now, of course, this story is almost certainly apocryphal. Zeno was only 11 years old when Diogenes died, and Simplicius was writing about it several centuries later. But even if this story isn't true, it still makes a really valid point. Motion is real. However, to properly solve these paradoxes, it isn't good enough to show that the conclusion is incorrect. We need to show what exactly in the arguments is incorrect that caused the false conclusion. This is where Zeno's paradoxes become much more interesting. The conclusions seem fairly ridiculous, but the arguments seem perfectly sound. Or at the very least, they appear to be mathematically sound. Thousands of years of debate over Zeno's paradox have had some pretty profound impacts on maths and philosophy. It has caused people to question how we think about the relationship between pure mathematics and the real physical world. It also helped lead to the development of calculus, which deals heavily with infinite sequences and introduced the idea of limits. Zeno's paradoxes are so foundational to modern maths and science that there are multiple phenomena in physics named after them, such as Zeno behavior and the quantum Zeno effect. A man has been sentenced to death for one reason or another.
First time.
The judge told the condemned, "You will be executed at noon on one weekday during the following week, but which day will be a surprise to you. You will not know the day of your hanging until the executioner knocks on your door at noon that day." Now, that's a depressing verdict to be told, but after being taken back to his cell and given time to reflect, the prisoner was delighted to realize that he would escape his execution because a surprise hanging was impossible. First, the prisoner concluded that it was impossible to be hanged on a Friday. If he was still alive after noon on Thursday, then the date of the execution could be deduced with absolute certainty. Following this logic, the prisoner realized that the execution couldn't take place on Thursday either. Friday already wasn't an option, so if the executioner hadn't knocked on his door by noon on Wednesday, then the execution would have to take place on Thursday. Since this could be deduced, it would again not be a surprise. Extending this logic out further, the prisoner was able to eliminate Wednesday, Tuesday, and Monday as options for the same reason. He realized that there was no way to carry out the sentence, and so he would have to be let free at the end of the week. At noon on Wednesday, much to the surprise of the prisoner, the executioner knocked on the door for the hanging. This is the newest of the paradoxes that we've looked at today, first coming to public attention thanks to a 1963 issue of Scientific American, though the paradox had been discussed since at least the 1940s. The paradox stems from the fact that while the prisoner was able to logically eliminate all possible days as being the date of his execution, the result was that an execution on any day became a surprise. There have been dozens of papers written about this paradox, but there's no agreed upon resolution. One of the issues is the somewhat vague language and assumptions being made. First, the term surprised is somewhat subjective. There is also the possibility that the judge is lying, that future psychological stress could reduce the prisoner's certainty of his initial conclusion, and other more opaque factors. While the arguments over semantics and definitions are relevant, the more common argument is that the prisoner's logic doesn't extend beyond the last day. Rather than focusing on the definition of the word surprise, the judge's decision can be reworded as, the prisoner will be hanged next week, and the date will not be deducible the night before from the assumption that the hanging will occur during the week. This change in wording means that being hung on a Thursday would still be a surprise, as it could not be deduced on Wednesday solely from the knowledge that it would occur at some point during the week. As of Wednesday night, there were still two options available for the date, and there was no way to definitively conclude which date the execution would take place on. It is only on Thursday night that the original statement becomes contradictory, and then it would be possible to deduce the date of the hanging. Now, if that still sounds a little confusing, think of extending the sentence out to 100 days instead of just 5. While the final day would not be a surprise, and it would certainly become less of a surprise as it reached the last week or so, it becomes much more intuitive that the prisoner's original conclusion shouldn't hold. The execution can still never be on the last day, but trying to reason that none of the other 99 days would be a surprise is a bit more difficult. Instead of extending the sentence to 100 possible days, other potential resolutions attempt to limit the sentence to a single Monday, which the judge still claims the prisoner will not be able to predict. Unlike the other paradoxes that we talked about, this one has yet to show any practical applications. That may be because it's so much newer, or it could be because it relies on a lot of vaguely defined terms within the original story. Either way, the prisoner probably should have stopped being so confident in his logic and filed an appeal or something. Just before we end today's video, for those of you who missed it earlier, please don't forget to check out today's fantastic sponsor. That's Tiege Hanley. You'll get 30% off your first box and a free gift from them by clicking the link below. And thank you for watching.